Well, it's Wednesday, and time to Wednesday's Word. So let me get into my office and get the door safely closed behind me and locked so I can take all this protective gear off and share a thought with you for today. So give me just a second here to get my gear off. Get my gloves off. Now, in case some of you are thinking that I'm kind of making fun of all the protective gear that we've been encouraging people to use, that is not the case at all. In fact, I'm trying to be maybe just a bit dramatic, if you will, about so that you will actually be using the thing. I've been using my mask, custom made by Chris LaTulip and his wife Donna, and many of you are doing the same things I am. You're wearing gloves when it's appropriate. You're using hand sanitizer. You're washing your hands a lot. You know, you've done away with the reusable bags at the grocery stores and using other kinds of things. And you're just trying to use all the tools that are at our disposal, if you will, to be safe. And I want to encourage you to keep doing that. But I want to persuade you in our Wednesday's Word today to use a tool that maybe we're not so much thinking about, but we really need to be, and that's our minds. There's been a lot more in the news now about the psychological impact that's been going on related to the lockdown that we've been in, if you will, the crisis and the way it's limiting our experience and all those kinds of impacts that it's having on us emotionally and otherwise. And I really want to encourage us to really think about the role that our minds play in this journey. You know, there's no doubt biblically that our minds are critical. They are strategic in our spiritual journey. And that includes our life here on the planet, as well as what we believe and think and all those kinds of things that we do. You know, that's why I think Paul said in the book of Romans, when he was talking about the impact that the life of Christ had in providing us a relationship with God, he said that we really needed to be renewed by the transforming of our minds. And today I want to talk to you about having positive thoughts, right? And that's usually language we kind of let we don't really associate so much with evangelicalism, those who believe in God and believe that God has clearly spoken to us through his divine word. That's really kind of that positive thinking message is something we leave off to those who often approach life without any acknowledgement of God or actually deny that there is a God. But I believe that positive thinking done biblically is a huge gift for us. And I want to encourage you to think positively. And, when I look at the scriptures, you see some guidance about how that's done. And I'm going to use a couple of examples here, but let me point out the principles and then I'll illustrate them from scriptures in a few places and then encourage you to use those. In order to think positively, biblically, there are two things that we really have to do. We have to get our focus off of us and get our focus onto God. We also have to get our focus off of our circumstances and get our focus on God and what God can do, what God has done, what God promised is he will do. Now, I think you see this in the scriptures quite a bit. One of those examples comes from Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. He told us, don't be anxious about today, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear, where you're going to sleep, those kinds of things. He said, you were focusing on us, what we need, and whether or not we have it circumstantially available to us. He said, don't get so preoccupied with that stuff. Instead, what does he say? Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you, right? So get your minds off of yourself, get them onto God. Get your mind off of your circumstances, get them focused onto who God is and what God can do in our world. You see a much more specific illustration of this in Psalm 22. And I want to read a few verses for us from Psalm 22. And this is a passage that just came up actually in our journey through finals because we find in it one of the statements that Jesus proclaimed from the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But let me just read some verses, and I'll just read it in a few sections. The first one starts with verses 1 through 5 of chapter 22. where it says, and this is from a Psalm of David. We don't know exactly what experience David was having. Could have been when he was being chased by Saul and he was having to live in caves and he really didn't know what was going to happen with his life. Could be when he was chased out of his kingship, if you will, by his son through a coup, and he's having to run and he's very vulnerable and exposed and feels defeated and his heart is broken and all those kinds of things. And just let me read the first 5 verses. He said, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance and from my words of groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you don't answer me. By night, yet I have no rest. But then he says, but you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you rescued them. They cried to you and were set free. They trusted in you and were not disgraced. Notice, first of all, he's looking at everything from his own perspective. He feels abandoned. He feels alone. He feels like God has forsaken him. And he's groaning and he's miserable and he's tired because he has no rest and those kinds of things. But then he takes his eyes off of himself, takes his eyes off of his circumstances, and he draws them back to the mountain from which his help comes, right? He draws himself back to literally the peak of that mountain, which is the holiness of God. And he remembers what God has done in the past to deliver Israel. And so he moves off of himself and his circumstances to God and what God has done. Same thing, picking up in verse 6 and running down through verse 10. It says, but I'm a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by people. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and they shake their heads, right? He relies on the Lord. Let him save him, they taunt him. Let the Lord rescue him, since he takes pleasure in him. So again, he's looking at his own circumstance. He's looking at what's happening to him. He's looking how vulnerable he is and how people are mocking him. And so his focus is on himself and focuses on his circumstances. But in verse 9, it says, it was you who brought me out of the womb, making me secure at my mother's breast. He looks at how God had been faithful to him beforehand. It says, I was given over to you at birth, and you have been my God from my mother's womb. Right? And so we see here that he goes back to, and he's reminded of the faithfulness of God. So he gets his ideas off of his own circumstances, off of his own feelings, and off of himself, and he's focusing on God and what God's done for him in the past, and with that, what God's going to do to him in the future. And he continues on with that, actually, in the next section as well, and I don't have time to read it, and hopefully you'll go back and do that. But it's interesting, in verses 11 through 21, same dynamic, but when he gets to verse 22, he switches gears, right? He switches into this idea of praising God in victory. So as he was able to engage in biblical positive thinking, to get his mind off of himself and his own circumstances and get his mind focused on God and what God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do, the whole thing changes, and eventually he lands up being the one who's leading the praises and the choir things. And I got to tell you, this is something that we really need to do as well. A lot of us have real legitimate reasons to be concerned. Right? We can focus on our circumstances and where we fit in the midst of that. And it can be really challenging. We have people in our church, family, and people that who are having to go to work. I mean, they're going out to places where they are clearly vulnerable and feel more exposed to getting the coronavirus and all that could go with it. And it generates genuine concern, right? And some of us are going through financial hardship. We've lost our jobs. Some of us are going through emotional hardship because we're in a position where we have to be laying people off. And there's lots of different dynamics that are going on. There are lots of things that want to draw our attention to the negative. And sometimes it's even just frivolous things. I was driving home the other day and driving by the place where I usually get my hair cut, and I'm thinking, what is it going to be like if I can't get my hair cut until June? My hair is going to be as long as it was in high school. That's all. That's a scary sight, right? What am I gonna do, right? Because I'm not gonna let my wife cut my hair because she doesn't want to cut my hair because she's afraid of what it will look like. So our minds get running with all this stuff, and we just need to have the biblical discipline to engage in biblical positive thinking. Get our minds off of ourselves. get our minds off of our circumstances, make sure that we are focusing our minds on God in the equation, who God is and the kind of stuff that God can do, trusting ourselves in God's care for us, and that everything that's taken place in our journey is a part of his providence and his plan for us. And with that, we can rely on him, and we can, in many ways, quiet our minds and quiet our hearts. And so we need to be people who are engaged in positive biblical thinking. We need to use this tool along with face masks and gloves and hand sanitizers and washing our hands and all the different things that we're doing, social distancing and getting to the grocery stores when nobody else is there and all that kind of stuff. We need to be doing all those things, but we need to make sure that we use this great gift of our minds that God has created and put it within us. And we need to make sure we focus those things on the positives of who God is and what God's going to do. Not that we ignore our circumstances, but that we don't dwell on them, but we make sure we include God in that equation, engage in biblical, positive thinking. So that's really my prayer for us as a group this week, that we would remember and connect God in the equation with us. Now, I want to offer just a quick benediction or a blessing in a moment, but let me remind you to look for the e-letter. It's going to go out tomorrow, Thursday, April 9th. And it will have links to our prayer guide for our prayer and fasting that we're going to do together as a body on Friday, Good Friday. And then it'll also include a link to be able to participate in our kind of a simple and somber online Good Friday service at 7 o'clock. And you can find that right through our website and through the link that's in the email. And make sure you pay attention, because we're trying to work out some stuff maybe for Easter Sunday that I know certainly would be a blessing to me if we can make it happen safely, and it might be for you as well. So pay attention to all of that stuff. And of course, we'll send out an email on Saturday with links to the kids' resources for Sunday, as well as the link to be a part of our Sunday morning live at 9. And it'll be Easter Sunday, and we're really praying it'll be an engaging and joyous and challenging kind of service. So here's my benediction, one I've been using. Be safe. Be safe in your body. Be strong. Be strong in your spirit, right? Be wise. Be wise in your mind. Make sure you're thinking about the positive things as well as the other things that are in your lives. And be full of the love of God. God bless, and we'll see you later this week.